Tonight at 10, snow and ice continue to cause treacherous conditions on roads in Wales and southern England. The whiteout left hundreds struggling, while thousands on the roads were trapped, delayed, and had their journeys severely disrupted.
It's very picturesque, I'm sure, but being here in the traffic is stationary for nearly 5 hours now is not a huge amount of fun.
And the forecast is for more severe weather this weekend, also tonight. The dramatic moment, millions of tons of mining waste engulfed nearby buildings after a dam burst in southeast Brazil. The mother of a 3-year-old girl has become the first person convicted of female genital mutilation in the UK. In Venezuela, calls for the biggest ever protest this weekend to end President Maduro's rule.
I come from a very large family indeed. Mammals, as a matter of fact.
Remembering Jeremy Hardy, the award-winning comedian who's died at the age of 57. And the celebrated British architect of this museum dedicated to black history in America says it's time Britain had one of its own.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, rugby's Six Nations gets underway in Paris this evening. Can the French end the Welsh 9-match unbeaten run? We'll bring you all the news from the Stade de France.
Good evening. Snow and ice are continuing to cause treacherous conditions on roads in Wales and southern England. Tonight, a section of the M3 motorway in Hampshire near Basingstoke remains closed in both directions due to 3 jackknifed lorries. And the advice to people in the area is to stay at home. There are also 2 Met Office warnings covering much of the UK. Well, today, more than 1,000 schools in England and Wales were closed after what was the coldest night in the UK for 7 years. In a moment, we'll get the latest from one of the worst affected areas, Cornwall. But first, our correspondent, Duncan Kennedy, is in Long Parish in Hampshire for us tonight. Duncan.
Well, Clive, we've been driving around Hampshire and Berkshire all day today, and it's been pretty much snowing all day. We are here in Long Parish near Andover, where some of the major roads are open, but many of the minor ones around here are simply blocked to ordinary cars. As you say, the M3 in Hampshire has been blocked altogether, both directions near Winchester. We've just heard in the last few minutes that the southbound carriageway has now just reopened for a couple of lanes, but it still meant travel chaos for thousands of motorists.
The M3 tonight at a full standstill. Desperate motorists trying to get home for the weekend. Some have been trapped for hours. Both lanes were blocked after 3 lorries jackknifed. Traffic had been slow in the run-up to rush hour, the thickening blizzard eventually halting vehicles completely. But it's not just the M3. We drove across Berkshire and Hampshire, and a series of smaller roads were also caught up in the chaos. The number of shunts countless, the skidding endless.
Although many of the A roads are open, it's the back roads, the B roads, that there's the problem. The gritters were out this morning, but they haven't managed to return, and therefore the snow is falling again on these surfaces.
Ian Crowder had been on his last day of work. Where else but at the AA? He was desperate to get home to celebrate, but instead he began his retirement stuck on the A339, and he's still there.
It's very picturesque, I'm sure, but being here in the traffic is stationary for nearly 5 hours now is not a huge amount of fun.
It wasn't just commuters stuck in the snow. The emergency services were not spared either. Out in all weathers, but caught out by today's snow. In Basingstoke, helpers pushed this ambulance up a hill after a specialist rescue team also got stuck. One more challenging moment on the day that February turned the south to freezing.
Images filmed by drivers trapped on one of the UK's most exposed stretches of road. Short of fuel, short of food, The lights of Jamaica Inn were a beacon to those who set off into the snow to reach them.
The only way I can describe it, it was like Armageddon, and I haven't seen anything like this. There was lorries jackknifed all up this road, there's lorries jackknifed, there's vehicles everywhere.
Well over 100 cold, hungry and exhausted travellers filled every available corner of the hotel. Across the region, others defied the ice and snow to help those in greatest need. One of Dartmoor's community nurses relied on park rangers to reach her patients.
Hello, darling. I couldn't do without them. No way could I do without them. I should just be sat here.
Worst case scenario, I mean, we would walk. We have done that in the past, but you know, you do have to get to these patients.
Do you want a bit of room with that one, my love?
The grip of winter has intensified hardship. Bristol's emergency programme provides help to the city's rough sleepers.
Basically, they bring sleeping bags to keep me warm, they bring hot drinks, they bring hot foods. Everything I need, they bring, yeah, just to keep me alive.
Back at Jamaica Inn, the surprise guests have rescued abandoned vehicles and headed home. But staff here say they'll be ready if they're needed again.
Well, it is still bitingly cold down in the southwest. There's more snow and ice forecast across all affected areas. But things have improved. Major routes are open. Minor routes are passable, though they are dangerous in places. And regional airports are saying they could be back to normal by the morning. Alongside all that, we're hearing so much about people like the staff here who came to the aid of those in need. Companies supplying bedding, individuals and families providing hot food and hot drinks, or even tractors to help pull people out of the snowdrifts. And all being hailed for their part in bringing a bit of warmth to the winter chill. Clive.
OK, Robert, thank you for that. Robert Hall there on Bodmin Moor in Cornwall. Now, dramatic footage showing the moment a dam burst in Brazil, releasing millions of tons of mining waste that engulfed nearby buildings, has been uncovered. 115 people are now known to have died in the disaster, which happened in the state of Minas Gerais last month. Hundreds of people are still missing. Our science editor David Schuckman reports from the site of the dam at Brumadinho in southeast Brazil.
First, a long cloud of dust, then a nightmare vision of an unrelenting torrent of sludge. The waste from decades of mining racing towards hundreds of unsuspecting people down below. The catastrophe unfolded a week ago, but only now has this video come to light, adding to the sense of loss and of outrage.
And difficult for you.
This Red Cross volunteer, Renato Silveira, leads me to the edge of the disaster zone.
6 corpos, 6 bodies.
He alone has found 6 bodies. Any hope of reaching survivors in this endless sea of mud was quickly dashed. Emergency workers are now scouting for any signs of bodies from the air, and they're picking their way over this horrific landscape. We spotted this search team with a sniffer dog in the distance. By the time the wall of mud reached this point, it had already overwhelmed the cafeteria where the miners were having lunch and destroyed the offices of the mine itself, before arriving here, tearing through a hotel and holiday chalets, before surging on over that ridge in the distance and down into the valley beyond, where it caused yet more destruction. And the question that everyone here is just stunned by is how, in a big, modern, growing economy, this could ever have been allowed to happen. Investigators are now on the scene. The dam holding back the waste was owned by one of the world's largest mining companies. It was inspected only last year. We find a local man, Leandro Gil, praying for friends lost in the mud. Unfortunately, he says, someone just thought about himself. He didn't protect the dam properly. So after years and years, that's now been revealed. A special mass, 7 days since the disaster. There's grief and anger, and the demand for answers will only grow. David Schuckman, BBC News in Brazil.
A woman from East London has become the first person to be convicted of female genital mutilation in the UK. The Old Bailey heard that the accused, who's originally from Uganda, cut her daughter, who was 3 at the time. The woman also believes she could silence the police and prosecutors by practicing witchcraft. Well, the girl's father was found not guilty. Adina Campbell, who's been covering the story, is here with me now. This is a huge milestone in the battle against FGM, isn't it?
Today's verdict is hugely significant. Almost 140,000 women and girls are affected by female genital mutilation here in the UK, even though this is a crime that's been illegal since the mid-1980s. So the fact we have this conviction is a big, big win for the survivors, their families and campaigners who've been fighting long and hard to see this happen. Now, the girl at the centre of this case, she was just 3 years old when she was cut back in 2017. Her mother claimed that she had fallen onto a kitchen cupboard while trying to reach for biscuits, but of course that wasn't the case, and she was taken to hospital with serious, severe injuries and was bleeding heavily. This has been an extraordinary case. We've heard evidence about the mother's interest in witchcraft. During a police search, police found silencing spells and 2 cow's tongues aimed at the foster carers, social workers and police officers in this case. The girl's father was also on trial for the same offences. He was completely cleared of all the charges against him, but the girl's mother is now facing up to 14 years in prison and she'll be sentenced next month.
OK, Adina, thank you. Adina Campbell. Now, Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaido is calling for the biggest mass protests in the nation's history this weekend as he tries to force President Nicolás Maduro from power. The opposition is demanding new elections to end the political and economic chaos engulfing the country. Human rights lawyers have told the BBC there's been a wave of political arrests in recent days, with some people being tortured. The government denies mistreating prisoners, but our international correspondent, Orla Guerin, has been hearing the harrowing account of one woman who says she was beaten and abused. You may find some of the details distressing.
Under darkened skies, Caracas waits. Some here hoping for a modern-day liberator to replace President Nicolás Maduro. But those who dare to oppose him can expect to pay a price. Almost 1,000 people have been detained in the past 10 days. We're on our way now to meet one of them. She's a young woman who we can't identify for her own safety. She's just been released and she has a harrowing story to tell. She says she was held for 8 days in this building, the headquarters of the military police. They interrogated her about a relative, a military officer suspected of plotting against the president.
They tortured me. They put a plastic bag over my face and choked me. Then they put my head in a bucket of water to try to drown me. I fainted and they beat me to wake me up. They put a gun in my mouth and cocked it. They said they wanted answers fast and that they loved to see people suffer. Their boss told them all to rape me. They lifted my shirt and took off my bra and they touched me.
Did you think that you might be killed?
Yes, because they were constantly saying it. They said they were going to kill me and throw me in the river. They said we are the government and nobody can do anything against the government.
Leading human rights lawyer Alfredo Romero is struggling to keep up. He says the government is in overdrive, trying to silence dissent.
Now we can talk also about generalized persecution, generalized detentions. They detained anyone in order to intimidate people and produce what they are producing, this fear of protesting, and that's what is going on.
But some, like Federica Romer, a politics student, are determined to keep up the fight. She says being a mother to 6-month-old Carlotta means she has to protest.
That this is for her, you know, this is for her. Before I had her, I felt invincible and I did not care. And now that I have her, of course, I'm scared to go out. I'm terrified, but this is absolutely for her, you know, because she is the next generation of this country, and they're the ones who are going to hold this country up.
Federica's preparing to go back out on the streets tomorrow at a mass demonstration called by the opposition. Gas mask at the ready. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Caracas.
Police are appealing for information about the mother of a baby girl who was left in a park in East London last night. The newborn is now in a stable condition in hospital. She was discovered by a dog walker in near freezing temperatures inside a shopping bag. Detectives say her mother may need medical attention and have urged her to come forward. America has announced it's suspending participation in a landmark nuclear deal reached during the Cold War. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, says it's because Russia has for several years been violating the terms of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The US decision will take effect from Saturday and last 6 months, but will become permanent if negotiations between Russia and the US fail. Let's talk now to our North America editor, John Sopel, who's in Washington for us. John, just how significant is this move by the White House?
Well, it is a big move by the White House, although not surprising. They have been warning for some time that Russia is not complying with the terms of the treaty. And so, if you look back, this is the treaty back in 1987 signed by Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev that led to the removal of cruise missiles from places like Greenham Common. Now, other European NATO members agree that Russia is not complying, but they disagree somewhat with what America is doing. They want this next 6 months to be used to try to salvage the agreement. The fear is that this could spark a new arms race between Russia and the United States. It could even lead to the unravelling of other treaties. And I suppose at the core of this is a worry that the architecture, if you like, that has kept the peace since the Second World War could be dismantled by an impatient American president and a defiant Russian one.
OK, John, thanks for that. John Sopel there in Washington. Now, there have been tributes throughout the day to the comedian Jeremy Hardy, who's died at the age of 57. He'd been receiving treatment for cancer. He won the Comedy Award at the Edinburgh Festival in 1988, but will be best remembered for his appearances on Radio 4's Sorry, I Haven't a Clue. Lisa Mazimba looks back at his life.
Actually, I was the youngest of 5 children. For that reason, I felt a bit weird. I felt I wasn't wanted. I thought I was a mistake. And I think that having had 4 children, what my mother really wanted was a holiday.
Jeremy Hardy's self-effacing style of humour was what made him a star.
The finest comedy minds in Britain, John Oliver, Rory Bremner and Jeremy Hardy.
His career began as a stand-up in the 1980s and continued for decades on shows like Mock the Week.
In the Second World War, it was just a piece of cardboard that said, "This is Mr. Wilkins, he's not a German spy."
He inspired us all. He was very unfussy, very self-deprecating. He always said he wasn't very good at that. He was principled, always principled, compassionate, kind, but just so wonderfully funny.
I think it's fair to say, though, that the BBC has never practised discrimination. They've always taken on any Oxbridge graduate, regardless of talent.
Despite jokes at its expense, he became a regular on BBC Radio 4 panel shows like The News Quiz and I'm Sorry, I Haven't a Clue.
Was your dad a king for a day? He must have been to make a princess like you.
Was your dad a pancake chef? He must have been to make a tosser like you. They talk about Lambeth, a cooperative council.
A lifelong socialist, his beliefs informed much of his comedy and he frequently campaigned too on numerous issues.
I remember him as a great friend, the other Jeremy. We did lots of events together. He was always giving his time to raise money that other people can speak for them. Human rights causes, justice causes. What a loss.
More committed to socialism than to singing, he'll be remembered for his sharp comic brain and, as radio listeners knew, a unique way with a tune.
The comedian Jeremy Hardy, who's died at the age of 57. Now, exactly 40 years ago today, the exiled cleric Ayatollah Khomeini returned to his native Iran, helping to establish a revolution that recast the country and its role in the Middle East. Iran's ties to the West were radically changed, and the Ayatollah became the supreme leader of the new Islamic Republic of Iran. Our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, was on that flight from Paris to Tehran with the Ayatollah and witnessed firsthand the revolution unfold.
It was a key moment in modern history. Under the Shah, Iran was increasingly westernized, but its vast oil wealth brought corruption and social upheaval, and that led to a year of violent demonstrations. Ayatollah Khomeini was in exile in France. He was implacable. The Shah must go. And soon the Shah was forced to escape abroad, a broken man dying of cancer. Throughout the revolution, Sir David Reddaway was a young diplomat in the British Embassy.
When we were in the middle of all the events of the collapse of the old Iran, neither we nor really anybody else knew what was going to come out of it. And I don't think many Iranians knew what they would be seeing over this timescale.
On Khomeini's flight back to Iran, I asked him what he was feeling. He ignored me. A moment later, someone else asked the same question. Nothing, he said. His return was a huge defeat for the West and a massive boost to Islamic fundamentalism. Even today, the pictures are still extraordinary. These were the crowds outside. I mean, people say it was the biggest crowd in human history. It was certainly a couple of million, maybe 3 million. There was a brief showdown between the army and the demonstrators a few days later. I watched as the victorious crowds trashed a secret police headquarters.
The policemen's uniforms, even the files that they found inside, have been scattered to the winds, and the demonstrators are in complete possession.
Ever since, the clerics have ruled Iran, clamping down in particular on women's rights. The only real challenge to them came in 2009, after a disputed presidential election. It was called the Green Revolution, and it rocked the religious leadership. But it was put down savagely. The BBC's Persian service is banned in Iran, but millions watch it anyway. Rana Rahimpour is one of its presenters.
There is appetite for change, but because there's nobody to mobilise the youth who wants change, I can't imagine another revolution happening despite the widespread corruption.
Its economy is troubled, but modern Iran can be surprisingly relaxed and pleasant. Still, people are scared to come out against the government, and that's kept the system going for 40 years. John Simpson, BBC News.
Wales staged a second-half comeback to defeat France 24-19 in the opening game of this year's Six Nations. 2 tries, including this from Johan Huget, gave the home side a 16-0 lead at half-time in Paris. But Wales looked a different proposition in the second half, and when George North grabbed this interception, he ran in for the decisive try. It means Wales are now unbeaten in 10 games. Sir David Adjaye, the renowned British Ghanaian architect, has told the BBC that a museum celebrating black British culture is long overdue. Among Sir David's most important designs is the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Here, a new exhibition of his work is opening at the Design Museum in London, and he's been talking to our arts editor, Will Gompertz.
He might be one of the most in-demand architects in the world today, but it has not been an easy ride to the top for Sir David Adjaye, who was a young British Ghanaian architect in the 1990s, found work difficult to come by.
Because you were black, did you find it hard to get commissions, to get heard?
Yeah, I mean, well, I didn't get any commissions. I was not part of any kind of patronage like that. Architecture is kind of an insider game because it requires a certain generation to give you, or to give access to you, or to say, or to sort of bless you as, you know, being good enough to join the club, as it were, and I didn't have any of that access.
So he started out designing spaces for old art school friends, before coming to public attention with the Ideas Store Library in East London, and then achieving global fame as the architect of the Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C.
What we've wanted to do was to make a museum that followed the narrative of the story, to take you into the depths of the earth and to kind of deal with that deep, troubling history. Ironically, that site was a slave market, so you literally are going through troubled earth, as it were, and then you rise up and have this overview and you're in the light.
Do you think there's a place in Britain for something similar, a museum to celebrate black culture in Britain?
I think that it's long overdue, and I think there should be a commission to understand this, because there's a huge story. And, you know, I think that most people think that Black Britain started with the Windrush. It started way before that. There are black people right back to the Elizabethan period, and I think that the contribution of of black people in sort of English Isles is an important discussion, and would empower generations of black kids to feel the connection that they have to England as their home, but to feel empowered that they're part of the sort of language and part of the DNA of the roots of this place too, and have a place in it towards the future. It's really amazingly important, the representation of people in the sort of cultural tropes of the nation.
That's one for the future, maybe. Right now, David Adjaye has plenty to keep him busy. Not least this project, the planned Holocaust Memorial in the gardens by the Houses of Parliament. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
That's it. Now on BBC One, time for all the news where you are. Have a very good night.